Thank you very much. My name is Charles Ramsey. My background is in policing. I began my policing career in the Chicago Police Department. I spent 30 years as a member of the Chicago Police Department. I left that department in 1998 to become police chief in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, where I served for 9 years. I then went to Philadelphia, where I served as police commissioner for 8 years and retiring in 2016. Obviously, I've seen a lot of changes over the 47 years that I actively served in policing. One of the biggest changes is the types of weapons that we recover on the street. I remember in the late 60s, early 70s, we used to recover something called Saturday night specials, which were very low caliber revolvers, 25 caliber semi-automatic. That was the typical handgun that we recovered from the street. Now, of course, police officers are recovering more and more dangerous weapons, large caliber semi-automatics, assault rifles, extended clips. It is very dangerous on the streets of our city, and something has to be done in order to minimize the opportunity for people to have their hands on guns that should not have them at all. There are some simple ways, in my opinion, to make an impact that hopefully Congress and that state legislatures around the country can take in order to make it more difficult for people to get their hands on guns that should not have guns. And I am a proponent of responsible gun ownership. I do believe that raising the age to 21 for purchase of any kind of firearm is more than appropriate. I think universal background checks is a reasonable step that ought to be taken. I think closing the gun shop and boyfriend loopholes that currently exist is another step that needs to be taken. I think that banning bullets that can penetrate body armor, as well as these extended magazines, ought to take place. I believe anyone who is arrested for domestic violence, there ought to be at least 72 hours in which of any firearms that they have, whether they, are registered to them or not, if it's in their possession, ought to be temporarily seized. Anything beyond the 72 hours should be a court that would decide whether or not that ought to be extended. But we see too much in terms of domestic violence taking place, and the accessibility of a firearm makes it a very potentially dangerous situation. Um, I believe reporting guns lost or stolen isn't too much to ask, because then we know that a gun is probably in the hands of someone who should not have the gun. We tried to get that legislation in Pennsylvania passed, and of course, our state legislature did not do it. And again, it's things like that that I think make a difference. I do believe there ought to be very stiff penalties for straw purchasers, people who buy guns for others who otherwise would not be eligible to buy a gun. If a person is buying a gun as a straw purchaser, there needs to be very serious consequences in order to prevent them or anyone else from the future, in the future rather, from using that as a way of providing guns to people that should not have them. I think these ghost guns that we're starting to recover more and more, any gun that is purchased, first of all, I think, buying guns online is something that needs to be tightly regulated. But if that's going to be allowed, uh, any parts ought to have a serial number. They ought to be traceable. There is no reason for these guns to not be traceable. And what people don't realize, these so-called ghost guns, privately manufactured firearms, go anywhere from small caliber semi-automatics all the way up to and including assault rifles. And so they do need to be regulated. Again, there are steps that can be taken to minimize the opportunity for people who should not have guns to get their hands on guns. And that's really where I stand on this particular issue. I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and hopefully something comes from this. Thank you.